Hi there, welcome to a focused video where today we take a look at what it's like and the meaning behind nightmares in regard to an individual that may have PTSD, complex PTSD, and the link to survivor's guilt. Explaining it all today, how under those circumstances, a survivor of trauma, a survivor of loss, dealing with a lot inside, carrying from the past, how it can impact a person's sleep, explaining why an individual may wake up at a specific time and how it becomes an unhealthy routine, the causes and the effects upon the body and mind, and what it can do long term. On top, explaining how it can link to relationships and the difficulties when it comes to arm's length, and ultimately how simply going to sleep, how it can lead on to a low episode or a deep severe freeze. I'm going to be explaining all of that today, including the non-effective healing methods, which do need to be acknowledged, and then the more appropriate, more effective natural healing that can be applied, okay? This is going to be an all-in-one video and a very important one to say the least. So feel free to sit back, relax, take it all in, and at any point or time, if it does get too much, you're more than welcome to pause the video, go at it at your own pace, listen at your own pace. If you need to take a break or walk away, feel free to do so. If it gets heavy, just as a heads up, this video will always be around and will be available in the playlist, the psychology one, which also covers the idea of survivor's guilt, PTSD, trauma, thoughts, OCD, all of it. You can find all of that top right corner where the eye symbol is up there. Just click on the box and then you'll get the full menu. Just want to say welcome to those that are currently watching this live premiere. Share your thoughts and opinions if you want to in the live chat. And yeah, we're just going to go for it bit by bit today at a nice steady rate. So first of all, what is the meaning of a nightmare? What's the meaning of something like that when it is applied to a person that may have PTSD, trauma, and survivor's guilt? It's the action of going to bed, going to sleep. The first part, drifting off, settling down. The second half, or the second stage of sleep, is when REM kicks in, rapid eye movement. It's when the body relaxes, the mind opens, where the unconscious and the subconscious mind, those thoughts and feelings come into play. Hence with dreaming, but also nightmares. Nightmares tend to be something negative. It can be a manifestation of an event, a traumatic moment, experience, which the individual had previously encountered. Any negative thoughts that were previously pushed under the rug, repressed back to the subconscious, unconscious mind, creeps back into open play when the individual is asleep. Look at it this way. When awake, the mind-body self-defense mechanism, denial, not accepting it, pushing feelings under the rug to protect one's own self. But then the moment you're asleep, possibly in a deep sleep, the body's relaxed, the wall is lowered, the self-defense mechanisms are lowered. So anything that was held back and repressed now creeps in to the open dream state, where nightmares can come in, intrusive thoughts can appear, and levels of stress, hormones and all that within the body are starting to go underway. And like with dreams, nightmares can be strong, they can be vivid, you may even remember them. An individual might have a a visual nightmare, an auditory nightmare, or both. And under the circumstances when an individual has PTSD or complex, and it might link back to a previous individual, like a bad relationship, an ex, and even survivor's guilt, a previous ex, it can compile and it can become real to the individual experiencing it and having that nightmare or night terror. It's very real. Feeling it all, like it's all in the moment. What's happened in the past, reliving it in the present day, where it feels like the person is kind of haunted, but then at the same time, it just feels like it's happening all over again. Even now, it can't be because that person is no longer present, for example, and people have parted ways since. But it's powerful what the mind can do within. The visuals it can create, the sounds it can sense, the body and mind, how it responds to it and how it copes as well. So nightmares, the opposite of dreams, under the circumstances of PTSD, complex, survivor's guilt. The mind is in overdrive. The defense mechanisms and the wall are lowered because of sleep time, relaxation. Things take over in a way. So when the individual wakes up, that's why feelings and thoughts can be at a spike, anxious, scared, and all of that. So of understanding a bit of the meaning behind it, as for causes and effects, we'll get to that in just a second. But the reason why I want to highlight the importance of this, the reason why it's so important to understand, whether it's an individual going through it right now or a partner that knows of someone that is going through this. It's important because, when an individual is awake and surviving the day, just getting by, coping, however they go about things, that can be a battle in the head, an invisible war, a lot of noise within. That can be wearing and sometimes too consuming. Videos that I've done previously highlighted that when dealing with a lot of stress in day-to-day life and responsibilities, any sensory triggers or triggers intrusive thoughts that remind them of the past, an ex, it can scare them, it can make them withdraw, a low episode, a deep freeze, and that's when the person is awake. I've done videos all on that. I said, you want it all? It's just up there, not far away. I did the coping mechanisms and healing to all that as well as healing and naturally coming out of a deep freeze. All that is important, but the reason why this topic today is just as important, if not more, is because it's like night and day. During the day, a battle, coping, fighting against it. But at night time, there can be a battle. And when the wall, self-defense mechanisms are lowered, it can become more consuming. It can be more intrusive, more invasive. The demons, the voices, the feelings, how they manifest can take over in a more powerful way. And at times, it's what can actually cause or drive a low episode. It's what can cause a deep freeze. But an individual could be somewhat okay, during the day, getting by. They might feel things coming on, early warning signs, but they may push it under the rug or not do much about it or just try to cope and may be successful in a way, doing the best that they can. But the moment an individual goes to sleep, dealing with those symptoms and possibly the oncoming side effects of an episode or anxiousness, a panic attack, things like that. The moment they close their eyes and start relaxing and breathing, drifting off to sleep, then the mind opens up, rapid eye movement, processing inside. All those unresolved thoughts and feelings are now being processed in the moment, reliving, reconnecting the dots to the past. It's like a time of reflection, but in an unhealthy and intrusive way, which can trigger panic, fear, worry, developing into a nightmare through visions and even hallucinations. Once overcoming it, which isn't easy at all, the next day, hours later, after calming down, is how the individual wakes up. After dealing with a night terror, a nightmare, their mood, their feelings, their thoughts could be different. For them, like waking up in the body of another individual, not feeling in tune quite with themselves or their own skin, maybe feeling disconnected from reality or who they are within this world. It's like there's a light switch. It changes. The moment they go to sleep, the moment they deal with a nightmare, coping and getting through it, once they wake up the next day or they cool down, they may feel different. It's not permanent. It could last for a few hours. It could last for a few days. Ultimately, it can come down to how intense the nightmare was, and did it trigger a low episode as a trauma response? Did it lead to a deep freeze, a withdrawal? That's something during the daytime, an encounter, or in recent time, the mind was looping on it in thoughts and feelings when asleep, which then linked or inadvertently linked to something in the past, a push-pull dynamic in which the thoughts inside, the demons, their own voice went against them when processing unresolved issues, current issues. And the more heavy it is, the more invasive and intense, the more vivid it could be, the more close to home it could be if it links to the past, can really knock an individual back. And that triggers a trauma response. The worse it is, possibly the longer term the trauma response may be to it, such as a deep freeze, freezing, clamming up, withdrawal. And all of that can stem from a nightmare. Whilst it can happen during the daytime, struggles and trauma responses, it can also link back to when going to sleep. And in some cases, it can all stem back to a nightmare. You could know of someone that has an episode. They could go quiet. They may not communicate as much. They may be quiet. Their body language may look different. They may come across as disconnected or disassociated at times. And you might wonder, why is that? Has something happened? Did I say something wrong? And likely, it's not you. It's what they've gone through. You could ask yourself, how come they were okay yesterday? Maybe because they put a mask on, pretending everything was fine, and they were just coping, getting by. But then when going to sleep, the mask comes off, the defense mechanisms are lowered, the darkness creeps in and consumes. When the person wakes up, panicked, startled, slowly but surely the trauma response kicks in to counteract it. But at the end of the day, all of that happened started from within the mind, and the past involved as well. So when you see someone and how they appear one day, the next day they may be different, but it's not personal. It's what went down that night, what went down the moment they closed their eyes. What did they see? What did they hear? And how did it link on? What did it lead to? That's why this is so important, not just in understanding the meaning of it, not just the causes, the effects it can have on the survivor, the one with the symptoms, but it's important to acknowledge how what happens in the day and how changes occur. And with trauma responses, it could stem back to the nightmares. Whilst the original problems may link back to the past, a traumatic event, controlling abusive relationship, things like that, it's dealing with what are the present issues, what's the current environment and landscape like, which is driving the past, enhancing the intense feelings which could link back to the past. What's happened back then has happened, but the effects and possible damage it has caused carry over as an invisible weight. And it's about trying to manage that weight in recovery, healing, and effective coping mechanisms to slowly heal with time and passively. And that can be done during the daytime, when out and about, or just simply static. But when asleep, the body and mind is in a much more vulnerable place. And that's why this is so much more important. Because when a person is in a more vulnerable, open place, such as bedtime, they're in their sanctuary, which they may associate with peace, quiet, and sleeping, relaxing. For those that may struggle to sleep but are prescribed certain tablets, medication to sleep, to pass out, to be knocked out, as powerful as that can be, it may only last for a few hours. Because as the time rolls on when the individual is asleep, when it wears off, the body, the mind may be naturally asleep and rested. But when thoughts creep on in, it can overpower the effectiveness of that medication. When certain hormones and within the body increase in levels at a certain time, that can awaken the body or the mind, and that nightmare can be such a disturbance that it does wake the individual up. So that is why this is so important. And I said, the more intense it is, the more of a trauma response that could take place in the length of time it lasts for. And it's more likely to hit harder when a person is asleep, because they're more vulnerable, and can be more prone to the head and the darkness within coming to the forefront of one's consciousness. Whilst asleep, the brain is still active. Muscles in the body are relaxed, but the brain is dreaming, nice dreams or more so nightmares. And then when reliving it, when envisioning it, living it in the moment almost feels so real, the body can half wake up visually or auditory or both, seeing it in person. If it's something close to home or something that's unresolved, like a previous partner encounter, and seeing it all in the moment happen in front of them. That is what can come about. Now, before we get any further with that, just need to highlight the causes, okay? The causes of how it all comes about. And that can apply to, first of all, REM, sleep, rapid eye movement. The second stage of sleep, when relaxed, the mind opens, eyes are closed, but it's functioning, beneath the eyelids, the brain is functioning and processing whilst relaxing, but processing information, thoughts, feelings, maybe applying it visually or to a sound, tracking back to a recent event or even the past if unresolved. And that can be a trigger which switches the switch, and then it can lead to a flood of thoughts and feelings, and how it can escalate. Other causes of what can cause a night terror can be what happens earlier on in the day, before nighttime. That could be being very busy, having a lot of responsibilities, dealing with a lot of stress, dealing with a lot of drama, conflict. Whether those issues can also trigger trauma from the past, like loud noises, unexpected sounds, flashing lights, conflict face to face because of past relationships, poor treatment, maltreatment, it can further enhance it. But just in general, when dealing with a lot during the day, it can lead to the mind being really full inside, and that could be a trigger itself. When dealing with PTSD, trauma, survivor's guilt, complex PTSD, even OCD, repetitive actions and thoughts and ruminating on stuff. When dealing with all of that or some of it, the brain can be exhausted by the time of either getting back home or just settling into a different room. Whether a person is working from home or out and about doing whatever in life at any time, a nightmare can come in unexpectedly. So if a person is dealing with stress, high stress levels, it can lead to the body, the mind feeling quite tense, and sometimes too stressed to sleep and unwind. There's a bit of a tension and resistance. So when that happens, the body and the mind is already deregulated, uncomfortable, maybe a little bit anxious, on edge. So when it does finally come to sleeping by force or taking medication and trying to ease it slowly, the mind is still, in overdrive in a way, maybe processing everything that's gone on during that day earlier on. And it could find a trigger, scanning for information, scanning for threats, scanning for, a form of closure possibly during the day, depending on how the body and the mind may work, of course. And there may just be a little trigger or a switch which changes, and then it flicks back to a previous memory, a previous thought. In addition, besides stress, what could happen is a positive moment during the day. Everything's fine, happy and fun, whether that be spending time with a friend, spending time with a new partner, such as arm's length in some way. Everything seems all fine and good and calm, and yet the moment they go to sleep, something bad happens, and then when they wake up the next day, they feel different. They may withdraw, they may retreat and freeze up. How can it go from something so positive to something so dark and scary for that individual? Because of survivor's guilt. So I'm going to explain more of that shortly. Okay, the impact, the effects of survivor's guilt, the deepness behind it, and the treatment recovery to heal from it in a way. So, beside survivor's guilt, unresolved trauma, and that can tie in with a form of survivor's guilt as well. Not resolving bereavement, unresolved feelings within, maybe not fully processing everything that's happened in the past because it feels so surreal. When it's not fully processed, there is unfinished business, and that's what can creep into present time, present day, and especially during sleep time. Dealing with the present, whatever that might be, day-to-day life and struggles, but then also it being combined and enhanced by previous struggles which haven't been ironed out or resolved. Like an open wound which never heals up, it's always there, and it's like a reminder, that sting, that burn, the itch, possible infection, and so on. And then anything else along the way adds to it. So the present struggles are important, but the past is in some ways significantly more important. And beside that, cortisol levels are like the stress levels, the stress release, the hormones within. When the cortisol levels are at and high and they spike, that can cause a night terror, or it can occur after a night terror. It can actually happen during a night terror. Okay? The cortisol levels, when they spike, it can trigger the body and the mind to wake up from that nightmare. They could still be reliving the nightmare whilst actively awake. And to them, it's what can make it feel so surreal, like it's happening real time. Whatever happened in the past, for some reason, it's happening right now. For someone who once existed in the past and through certain circumstances no longer on this earth, the individual may see their former partner in front of them. Sometimes it can be a comforting feeling, but to an individual that's trying to move on in life, trying to find a new relationship, when they're haunted by the past, it can be a scary and confusing place to be, wanting to be left alone, wanting to be at peace and to move on, to get visions or thoughts and feelings and voices of a previous person, and it's not positive either. It can be really difficult to go through. So the cortisol levels, when they spike, it can overpower possible medication taken as well. So when an individual ends up waking up at a certain time, it could possibly link to the cortisol levels. There can be people on the sideline, wannabe experts, that may tell an individual, you wake up at a certain time often because it's a sign from the past. They're the claims what non-experts say. Random people online, random strangers, they don't do much good. They may cause more problems for that individual going through all the symptoms. If it's left on a cliffhanger as well without treatment, what good does it do? To make it clear, a person could go to sleep, everything seems fine, with medication or without. And then at some point, they may start experiencing a nightmare, a night terror, but they're not fully awake to feel it. They don't have that feeling of sleep paralysis. They're just asleep, but the mind is still ticking away. When the cortisol levels, the stress increases from that possible nightmare, and just naturally when the cortisol levels rise during the early hours of the morning between 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. is what can trigger the body and mind to wake up. Now, for individuals that don't have symptoms or issues with PTSD or survivor's guilt, etc., they may still naturally wake up at some point during the night or early hours of the morning, and that could also link back to the cortisol levels. But for them who aren't dealing with a nightmare or a night terror, they may wake up, stretch, look around, think nothing of it, and then eventually drift back off to sleep. But an individual with PTSD, complex and all of that, when they wake up at 3 in the morning to 4 in the morning, roughly, the cortisol levels have spiked, it's waked them up, then they become more aware and alert of what they've previously been dreaming, more so a nightmare, which could still be active in the moment. And it also plays a role, the intensity of the nightmare, which can also just wake them up in the middle of the night too, regardless of the time. So it goes hand in hand, cortisol levels spiking and waking up, experiencing an intense nightmare, sometimes enough to wake the individual up. Either way, when they do wake up or partially, they feel it still. What was in here possibly could be expressed outwards, in that same room. They're in bed, and in front of them or besides them could be a vision, could be a person, and it might link back to the past. It might even be a previous ex-partner, maybe a bad one, When the individual is awake and that nightmare is still present, that's what the scary feeling is. People hope that when they wake up from a dream or a nightmare, it's not real, that it's all gone away. But when the individual is still half asleep and half awake, there's a blurred line, a crossover, an overlap with feeling conscious, but also feeling paralyzed mentally or physically. Fight and flight mechanics can kick in during that time. That is like the self-defense mechanism of the body, trying to combat and fight against the darkness, that feeling, that vision, the nightmare, whether it be auditory, whether it be visual. Flight mechanics, as in running away or simply freezing, not moving, not talking, just reliving it and feeling it all over again, visually, sounds, the senses. It's like an ultimate trigger. So like during the day, there might be a smell, there might be a sound, there might be a visual, a sensory action or reaction which triggers the person, which relives a core memory and fragments from the past which hurt them, traumatized them. It's like being re-traumatized in the moment. However, it's much more impactful during sleep time because of the intensity of it, and maybe it's more than one sensory trigger, which leads to an overwhelm, an emotional overwhelm in combating it, feeling it all and processing, fighting against it, or flight, running from it. But paradoxically, not being able to literally run away from it because it's in here. And if it's not just in here, it's around visually, or at least that's how it is for that person at the time. It feels so real. Now, when they do manage to shake it off, or time passes through the night or the day, when they can calm down a little bit, likely they look around, that ex-partner is nowhere to be seen because they're no longer present or no longer on this earth because of the past. They look around, they're in a different environment. They're in their house, their new house, their safe place. Realizing it all. But at that time, during that moment, during sleep, things felt very different. And the reason why this is all important is because it's okay saying when they snap out of it, things go back to normal, but that's not always the case. Sometimes when it is quite a powerful dream nightmare, it can change an individual temporarily, and the trauma response can vary on the strength of it, which could link to a withdrawal, freeze response, low episode, which leads to more struggles, more struggling, but during daytime besides the night. So what caused it all in the present moment was a possible nightmare. That's why this needs to be addressed. So then methods can be applied to coping with it to reduce these issues and struggles naturally. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that eventually. But linking back to survivor's guilt, you can have a good day, you can have a good time with or without someone. You could be in a new relationship, happy, excited, all those feelings. And yet when they go to sleep and then they have a nightmare, but how does a good day equal a bad night? When dealing with survivor's guilt, that feeling of not being allowed to have fun in life, not being allowed to move on in life because it's seen as rude, disrespectful to a previous partner who's no longer here on this planet, who can't do the same thing as them. They convince themselves that they have to remain loyal to someone that's no longer here. Now, in terms of dealing and coping with all that, I've done a separate video on it, so don't worry. For more context, it's available up there where the eye symbol is. You will find it. But in short, they limit and restrict themselves. They limit and restrict their own happiness in life and new connections, relationships they may come across, which can involve holding someone at arm's length to protect themselves and also protect themselves from the past. In some circumstances, depending on how long they've dealt with it for, they could associate night terrors, sleep terrors, with survivor's guilt and think it will only happen or come about if I have fun in life, if I have a good day, if I get too close to someone, if I get too intimate with a new partner, that I will be punished, or I will inadvertently, subconsciously punish myself during sleep time when processing unresolved trauma, unresolved bereavement, unresolved survivor's guilt, where upon reflection, visual, mental imagery and feelings flicker back to the past, reliving what may have happened back then, which may have caused the passing of someone, blaming themselves for that, and then also having a go, questioning themselves and trying to figure out the what ifs and why did all that happen. It's like mental torture, but it can't be helped because there's so much to deal with and there's a lot going on inside, you know? And it can be triggered or it could be enhanced when they've had a good day. You know, if they've convinced themselves or they truly believe that they can't have fun in life because their previous partner wouldn't allow it or wouldn't be too happy of it, the feeling of lack of closure, the feeling of being a bad partner, even though that previous person's no longer present, that survivor may blame themselves but also deny themselves of happiness. And whenever they do have happiness, when they deserve it as well, they might punish themselves afterwards. I mean, there's all different types of struggles and issues out there where a person could do well, something good happens, but then in their mind, they don't deserve it. They shouldn't be allowed it, so they take it away from themselves. It's like a form of self-sabotage. Self-sabotage as a means of regulating the body to try and keep stable, even if it means isolating, even if it means not being fully happy, just to maintain a level of calmness so the past and a previous partner doesn't creep in or, react badly. Whilst the partner, previous ex, is no longer present in that individual's life or on this earth, the mental note, any scars, the mental imprint that they left on life upon that survivor may have been strong enough to leave like a visual, emotional imprint. And through trauma as well, if there was a traumatic event caused by it or separately, it can just leave a print, a lasting impression, just like how abuse, relationships and all that can. And it has lasting negative effects. So understandably, there is a lot going on. And during nighttime, when it should be a place to be able to relax and be calm, it's like a battleground. It should be a sanctuary of peace, thoughts and dreams, and that should be it. But when dealing with a lot from the past and any triggers in the present and any good moments, any good encounters, a new happy relationship, that can be a trigger too. I mean, what could happen is the individual spends the day hanging out with their new partner, may have the first kiss, the first intimate moment, it's all nice and perfect. And they go back home or return back to wherever, happy, content, satisfied, and eventually they go to sleep, and then that intrusive thought or feeling, those demons within come alive, the subconscious, unconscious thoughts of unresolved past and feelings of survivor's guilt. That self-punishment creeps in. It's like a inner monologue. It could be something like, see, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Why did you do that with that person today? Why did you kiss them? Why did you have fun with them? You're not supposed to have fun. Don't you not remember the past? Don't you not remember what's previously happened? You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be moving on. That's disrespectful to the previous person. That's the inner thought that they could be feeling and thinking within. It's their own voice, it's their own thoughts, but it could manifest in the different visual or auditory presence of someone else, such as from the past. That their own mind, their own thoughts, their own voices can transform into someone completely different. So to the individual who's like self-blaming and self-attacking themselves during the sleep, it kind of like disconnects, disassociates from their voice, their thoughts, to their ex-partner who comes into play. It's all coming down to the mind and what's in the head. Not to sound disrespectful, but it's not real. It doesn't exist no longer. But to them, it feels very real. So a partner on the sideline, the best thing you can do is to listen and believe them. When they say they've seen it or they've heard it, their partner in the same room, talking to them, arguing with them, it's best to believe them, not just for the sake of it, but because of care, because of understanding and the past. Biologically, psychologically speaking, the self-defense mechanisms, the way the mind can work, it can create such strong visual images and sensory feelings that it does become real, or at least that's how it feels at the time for the person going through it all. And with all the noise going on inside of the head, their voice, their feelings, that can transfer into the energy of the presence of a previous individual. And for them, when they're half awake and half asleep, they see that person. They see that voice, hear that voice. So whilst it's still their own mind, their own thoughts and own unresolved problems from the past, it's been mimicked in the presence of an actual, feeling of a physical presence of someone else. That's how it can be. That's the depth that it can go to. So beside the survivor's response to it, it comes into play the concept of hallucinations, such as with an ex-partner, an ex-friend, an individual that may have caused harm, maltreatment, mistreatment to that survivor some point previously. That ex-partner that may have passed away under shocking circumstances, which leaves a lasting impression on the survivor that feels bad or to blame for it. So when combining it all together and even having a good positive day when going to sleep, the person themselves starts thinking of the past and what they would feel, what they would think, as in the ex, how they would react, and any unresolved trauma too, then comparing it to the present. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be having fun. I shouldn't be enjoying or living life when other people can't. Shame on me. That self-hatred, self-loathing, self-punishment. They don't deserve to do that. They don't deserve to feel that way. But they've been made to feel that way due to other factors out of their control, in which they believed or were convinced that it was because of them. It plays on the mind. And with OCD too in the mix, it can really play on the mind on loop. And when asleep, defense mechanisms are lowered. It's easier for the intrusive thoughts and negative feelings and self-negative talk to take over. And when it gets loud and noisy, those words, those lines go from the person's own inner conflict and manifest into the physical presence of a previous partner, relationship, or an event, which becomes very visual. And that can also just apply to trauma as well, beside it all, just a traumatic event from the past, becoming present in the moment, reliving it all like it's some kind of visual memory. Whether they're directly in the driver's seat, acting out it all, reliving it, or they're a passenger on the sideline watching it all unfold, watching an older previous version of themselves and whoever else during that traumatic moment. The reason behind it is because of unresolved trauma, but then the act of continuing or thinking it, the fight and flight mechanic, as a trauma response, it's a means of trying to process trying to piece together the past that never made sense in hopes that in the moment when asleep or half asleep, one can make sense of it to finally find closure. But there can be times where it's impossible, or at least it feels that way, because of how things ended previous, because of how things went back then without answers. But still, even if it felt impossible, the brain, the mind is desperately trying to make sense of it all, looping around with the what ifs and what could have been different, what could I have done, what could have happened instead. You know, all of that, looking back in hindsight, weighing it all up, a heavy load and burden to take on in regard to something that happened in the past and likely out of their control. But reliving it all in the moment, that in itself can be re-traumatizing, which can link onto its own side effects of panic, fear, discomfort, anxiousness, trust issues. But then pairing it with survivor's guilt, deep shame and deep guilt, like a relapse of those feelings just because of a new partner, just because of a moment earlier in the day where they could be happy, they could be more themselves, and then punishing themselves indirectly when asleep because of the past and considering the past, considering a previous partner that's no longer present. Like a cycle, a loop. It doesn't just happen once, it can happen often, or it could happen here and there. The times when it doesn't happen often, the more intense it can be and the more it can catch someone off guard. But look, this is the thing. Night terrors, nightmares are bad, and the causes and the effects are visibly known and acknowledged. But the act of waking up like a certain routine, an unhealthy routine or an undesirable routine, such as waking up at 3 in the morning or 3:30 onwards, and that happening every single day, it doesn't always link to a night terror, a nightmare, but it could still link to unresolved thoughts and feelings from the past. It's just that on that day, that night, it just wasn't that intense for it to trigger an onset core memory or a visual nightmare. You know, like when people maybe a bit stressed or they've got a project, they've got a big thing the next day, they've got an exam, they go to sleep, but it's on the mind. And because it's on the mind, they could be a bit restless in bed. They might not have the best quality of sleep. They might even wake up a bit earlier, and that's when they panic or worry just a little bit because of what's to come. So it can be like that for a person with PTSD, complex PTSD, where there's not a big flare up, there's nothing too triggering going on earlier on in the day. They may have not had a great day, just an okay or kind of a bad day, nothing too triggering to warrant the survivor's guilt. But when they go to sleep, still certain thoughts and feelings from the past because simply unresolved. And when things are unresolved, the brain may cling and stick to it until it learns or figures out an answer, even at times when there might not be one, determined to find an end, a form of closure, right? So with the mind being preoccupied and certain stress levels rising just a bit, the cortisol levels rise as well. And I said from 3 in the morning onwards, it can spike, it can rise. If the body and mind is already a little bit restless, it might be easier to come out of that sleep, that rapid eye movement. So they're awake, they're alert, they might not be scared, they might not be panicked, they might be somewhat okay, but they don't feel quite comfortable enough to sleep. So what do? They may get up, do a chore, do a hobby, something, pass a bit of time, watch TV, look on the laptop, computer. This can still happen when a person is under medication, right? Linking back to those deep, unresolved thoughts and trauma which can play on the mind even when it's not severe enough to cause a nightmare. And the cortisol levels rising, they wake up a bit earlier or quite early. And that can occur regularly. It could occur daily or almost every day, waking up at the same exact time. What I said a bit earlier on about wannabe experts defining what it means to wake up at a set time every single day or close to it. There's dangers behind that. I'm going to highlight it right now just as a heads up, so just bear with me. Non-experts can jump in with their spiritual ways and their feelings from the past, whatever, and say or suggest, and some state as a fact, which is reckless, but they say it as this: you may wake up at a set time every single day because it's a sign, it's a message from a previous loved one trying to send a message to you. That is really reckless and does not help the person, the survivor. Short term, it could bring hope. It kind of reconfirms in their own mind that what they were feeling, the nightmares that they had, the hallucinations were in fact real, because someone else has confirmed it, that the reason why they wake up at a certain set time is because a loved one is trying to send them a signal, a message. Whether that be positive or negative, it just confirms in the survivor's mind that they're not going crazy and they were right to think or feel a certain way. That really isn't good, because all that does is reconfirm in the survivor's mind that they think and struggle and suffer and process the way they do as a means of it working in some way. And if it's confirmed that what they've been doing and thinking was the right course of action, or it was as a sign of leading to answers, because the claims of a loved one trying to reach out to them, it might feel like I'm on the way. I'm going to reach that point of getting the answers that I've longed for, whether that be the answers behind the death of someone, the answers behind why they were so abusive or controlling from the past. It's finally reaching ahead. But possibly it never does. So they're just left waiting and hoping. You see how dangerous that is? You know, some people may say it's a sign from a loved one. It's meant as a means of comfort, that they still care, that they still think of you. But when you're dealing, and you know, wannabe experts, when dealing with a survivor that's gone through trauma, that's gone through survivor's guilt, the loss of someone in the past under more extreme conditions, when you've got a survivor from domestic abuse or control and all of that, whilst on the surface level, they may want to hear that it's a loved one from the past, a sign, a message, deep down, it's something that they don't need and shouldn't have, because it just causes re-traumatization and confirmation of everything that's happened then and reliving it now through the nightmares as all real, when the current nightmares ongoing aren't actually real in present time. It's only real to them in the moment because of how vivid it feels. Put it this way: if you've got two people in a room and the survivor is having a nightmare, a night terror, and they're acting out that dream, that hallucination visually whilst they're half awake too, body and mind, talking to what exactly? They are talking to their partner or someone that they know of previous. To the other half, the other partner, all they would see and hear is their loved one talking to the wall, talking to nothing. There's nothing there. For them, there is someone there. For the other person, their point of view, no one there. It looks like they're talking to themselves. Deep down, that survivor is talking to themselves, but how they're talking to themselves, their inner thoughts are manifesting in the presence, creating a vision of someone from the past. So when they're talking to that vision, they're talking to their own inner thoughts, their own inner conflict and turmoil from the past. A conversation with themselves, but they don't see it that way. An act of trying to resolve and get closure and peace to process it all. But it's done in a way where they may never get it. because they're having a conversation with themselves at heart. They're not truly getting an answer from a person from the past because they're not present to actually give that answer. A form of proper closure in a more real, physical, ground reality perspective would be if there was a criminal who robbed someone or used an object on that person and harmed them. They're in prison, locked up, and then they want to be visited by the victim to apologize and explain themselves. You know, that process, a level of forgiveness or just a level of receiving closure. The victim goes to the prison, talks with that inmate, the perpetrator. Perpetrator thoroughly apologizes, maybe, gives their backstory, their reasoning, perspective, and then whether the survivor, the victim, the one on the receiving end, accepts the apology or just gets the closure, as in, why did it happen to me? Why did you target me? Why did it have to happen? What was the reason behind it? When they get those answers, it puts their mind a little bit at peace and rest, knowing that maybe it was a one-off, maybe it's nothing personal, maybe there's a deeper reason behind it, but they're just truly the bad one, mentally unstable, and it's got nothing to do with the victim, it's got everything to do with the other who's a bit struggling in the head, you know? Doesn't always work, but I tried summarizing it then. That's like a proper face-to-face meeting with a real person that caused problems in the past, for one, and now it's confronted. For a survivor who's going through a nightmare, confronting it in the moment, fight or flight mechanics, through talking it out, visualizing it, or physically fighting it, possibly through involuntary movement, involuntary body movement, shaking, kicking the legs, half asleep, punching the air. You know, when a partner's nearby, boundaries and space is respected for the protection of both people. What's being acted out during the nightmare isn't done personally, it's their own inner conflict and struggles, reliving it, and it all leaking out into the room, which they visualize as it being real. So that's the depth that it can come to, right? So when linking it back to a wannabe expert that simply says waking up at a certain set time as a means of the past, catching up and a loved one reaching out, under the circumstances that a person hasn't been traumatized or negatively impacted, but they just simply wanted closure, maybe it could come across as kind, sweet, heartwarming. But for an individual that has gone through hell and back, the one thing that they don't want, even though they may accept it at first, what they don't want is to be told it's a loved one from the past, especially if that loved one could be considered as a bad ex, sending a message to them. What does that do for the survivor? Well, at first, it might be a rush of positiveness, happiness, just because of how things ended in the past, holding on to the positives as a means of coping and maintaining a level of, sanity, so you don't go insane, that type of feeling. But they may get a rush of positivity because of the past, if it's a message from a loved one, even though it may have been a bad ex, because just of those natural, genuine feelings and attraction, whether that be driven through the trauma bond relationship, or it just be because it's been such a long time that sometimes you forget the negatives, or you get the rush of the positives, and then shortly afterwards all the negatives rush in. Just how the body, the mind processes it. But honestly, just in general, and for those wannabe experts that want to give all that out, I think best thing to do before you tell someone, whether you know it as a truth or it's BS or you're just guessing, before you tell anyone that it could be a message or a sign of someone, a loved one from the past, you have to consider the survivor's history before you say anything. Because if you confirm anything without knowing their past, you mean it in a sweet, kind way, but for them, it's just confirmation that their past hasn't escaped them, that their trauma, their haunting consumes them till this day, but they can never escape from it. That's how it can create that feeling. That's how it can intensify nightmares. That's not good. It's not healthy whatsoever. Whether the survivor inquired about it from someone or someone just decided to say it out, it's the responsibility of that person that holds that supposed knowledge to go about it appropriately, because if they don't, they could indirectly, inadvertently re-traumatize that survivor on a bigger scale, and that's not good whatsoever. When a survivor is trying to find answers, they could be in a slightly vulnerable state where they may do anything to get answers. They may believe anything in hopes that it can help them. No disrespect to that individual, of course, but it's the responsibility of either a professional, a member of the general public, a friend, stranger, to go about things accordingly, not telling them things that they want to know, maybe supporting them or just being somewhat balanced to an extent, depending on how close you can get and how much you know about that individual. You've got to go about it carefully. This is on an external level right now, but sometimes what happens, these experts or people that want to help can cause more damage indirectly, and things that they say can be on a cliffhanger because, truth or not, and maybe likely it's not, because there's no evidence to prove it, biologically, evidently, cortisol levels, the way the brain, the body works during sleep time, that can explain why a person wakes up at a specific time often. The internal body clock, how it's rendered, how it's structured, the routine behind it all, like how people may not always rely on an alarm because they're just so used to waking up at the same time every single day. It can happen. So biologically and even learned behavior, it can occur, and it doesn't always have to link to the past, as in a message from a loved one. Sometimes there might be truth in it, but other times it can be a bit of a scam. People can benefit off that. Mediums, psychic mediums and all of that. We'll get to that later because there's a bit of depth behind that we need to get to, but it needs to be done appropriately, okay? So I appreciate if you're still watching and those in the background. We'll just take it bit by bit, slow down just for a second until we get onto the effects, the side effects of all this, okay? Right. So, the effects of a nightmare during sleep can result in hallucinations visually, and hallucinations of voices and sounds from the past, but it's manifested and it's been transformed that way because originally it stems back from the survivor's own thoughts, their own voice, their own feelings, but they can't recognize it as their own because it's transferred into a past core memory. It's like their voice and feelings have been put into the shoes of someone else who they can't relate to themselves because they aren't aware it is themselves, as in their voice. The voice has changed, the visual person has changed, who they see in front of them. So they don't relate it back to themselves. They think it's another person and it's reliving it all from the past. But realistically, it's their internal conflict, the push and pull, the self-defense mechanisms within, the survivor's guilt push and pull. One thing could be their heart is pulling in one direction, had a great day, met a new partner, having fun, perfect. The brain, self-defense mechanisms, don't be doing that. You don't want to get hurt again. What if they let you down? What if they show their true colours? What if it's all one big game? What's the catch behind it? What would the previous partner think from the past? Wouldn't they be sad or disappointed? Push-pull, tug of war, emotionally taking a toll on the body and the mind, exhausting. And because of that, and how it can trigger those nightmares and just trauma itself, reliving the past, going through it all, besides hallucinations, just the feeling, the effects from it, feeling anxious in the moment, and more so when they wake up through the day, feeling raw, anxious, feeling of the heart rate intensified, beating faster, possibly higher blood levels as well because of the stress and the strain on the body. Waking up in unusual positions, that can apply too. Waking up half on the bed, half off the bed, waking up on the floor, waking up upside down in the bed in an awkward position, whether that leads to the body feeling a bit stiff and achy or sore, it can link to the nightmare. As in, when asleep and then half asleep, going through those stages, when the, for example, fight mechanic kicks in, dealing with the nightmare, body and mind reacting to that, trauma, reacting to that partner, that visual creation in the moment, kicking it, punching in the air, twisting and turning under the sheets, rolling under the sheets in bed, kicking out with the legs as an involuntary response to the stress and the struggles of the moment. Like how, it's not the best example, but like when you get dogs that are sleeping and then they start kicking the back legs, that could be because they're dreaming of running, dreaming of something, like it's in the moment. And because it feels so real in the moment, the body's acting out those behaviors and motor actions. When something feels more real, it's like the body responds in a real way too, even when static and asleep and half asleep. If it's something traumatic or domestic from the past, poor treatment, maltreatment, physical, verbal, there could be an involuntary reflex, an involuntary, flinch, the body flinching, the hands moving about under the sheets, punching out, kicking out, because it's a fight mechanic. The survivor is reliving possibly a bad event from the past, which they visualize as if it's happening in real time. It's happening all over again, but this time around trying to process it and fight off against it to prevent it happening again, or to try and change the outcome of what happened back then, change it to what happens now. The body and mind punching, kicking, tussling under the sheets, turning about, moving, possibly even getting out of bed or sliding out of bed to try and avoid that vision, fight back against that vision of the past. Self-defense, even when nothing's there, to them, how they feel with their mind at that time and those visions, it's very real and it is happening. So when they talk back, when they shout out, if they screamed, it can be a trauma response. It can be a means of processing and trying to change history because they don't want to feel what they felt back then. But in the process of all that, there are still feeling negative thoughts and maybe scared and panic and worry that it's happening and it feels like it's taking control and it's intrusive. They didn't ask for it. They didn't want this, but it's happening. So it's like, they could be like, get away, no, please don't, no, something like that, or screaming outwards, which could wake or disturb others thinking, what's going on? They're screaming because they're reliving an event. They're shouting or answering back because they're trying to defend themselves, trying to get their voice back that they lost, that other person took from them in the past. In that moment, it's like a battleground. And because of that involuntary movement, and whilst they're half awake and half asleep, whilst the dream is vivid, their actions internally may go unnoticed to them. And as like a trauma response, brain fog, confusion, disassociation, some of that can play a role in that when they wake up the next day, the sheets might be off the bed. The sheets might be in the corner of the room. The lamp nightstand may be on the floor. They may be upside down in bed. They may be hanging out of the bed. And when they wake up, depending on how bad the night terror was, because if it's subsided, and then they were able to drift off back to sleep, for example, when they do wake up, whether they're fully fine or a little bit confused, they'll look around them and think, where's the sheet? Why is it in the corner of the room? Why is the nightstand or the bed lamp table on the ground? Why do I have the odd bruise on my arm? Why am I bruised on the leg? What's happened to me? Why has this happened? You know, you've woken up in an unusual position, or things aren't where they should be, and especially when paired with OCD, that routine, those rituals, that sudden change up can cause panic. Why is the pillow on the floor? Why are the sheets inside out? Why is my hair not tucked behind the bed? Why do I have scratches on my cheek, on my neck? And when they try and work it out because they might be worried or concerned, it might scare them, as in, what really went on in this room where it's supposed to be my safe space? It's a scary time because of dealing with the unknown. But that nightmare, what they had during the night before, if it's vivid and strong, they may start remembering it. They may remember it and how they felt and what they saw and heard, but they might not associate it with their fight, flight, self-defense mechanics. If they were to react at the time during sleep, fighting against the dream, tussling and turning, involuntary movement, reflexes, flinching, chucking the pillow over there in hopes of hitting that person to get rid of that memory, throwing the pillow over that way to push away as a metaphor for resistance and darkness, pulling the sheets over themselves to try and hide from whatever as a flight mechanic, running away, tossling and turning in the bed to the point where they end up falling out of the bed or half out of bed, and then eventually calming, relaxing, but staying in that same position. Eventually, when they wake up, they're aware of the changes, but not aware of how it links back to their trauma response, their self-defense mechanisms during their night terror, you know? With so much to deal with, they can't consider it all and combine one thing with another. If they get scratches because when they were defending themselves, or that involuntary movement by accident, they may have brushed the hand across the face, their own, or against the neck or chest and accidentally scratched themselves. If they're, moving about or punching or kicking, they might accidentally punch themselves in the arm, in the leg, or kick their other leg by accident. Or if they were tussling in bed violently, involuntary, they may have fallen out of bed, bumped their head, bumped their shoulder, their knee on the floor if they fell out of bed, banged it against a table. In some circumstances, getting out of bed and walking around, kind of like sleepwalking, but on a more extreme scale, Under those circumstances, they could injure themselves when going through a night terror, but they can't associate both together to explain it because they don't remember how they reacted. They only remember what they saw and heard. So it can be dangerous for them. It can be a scary time. But it's about understanding that to lower the stress and lower the panic, the reason why some things may not appear in the right places or locations and waking up visually things feel different is possibly because of their own actions back when they were asleep, which they're not aware of or can't associate with because they can't remember. It's got nothing to do with saying what they saw or felt wasn't real. It was real. It was very real to them in that moment. And their actions as well and reactions to it were very real. It's nothing to do with shaming or critiquing. It's just about providing that perspective and the link biologically and psychologically speaking of how one thing can link to another, how an action can link to a reaction and the consequences from it. But it's important to acknowledge, especially as a partner to someone who may be struggling under these circumstances, is not to label that individual as, unstable or weak or anything like that, because first of all, they don't deserve it. And second of all, they didn't ask for all that trauma. They didn't ask for these things to kick in or these intrusive thoughts. They're dealing with a lot and possibly struggling with a lot. At the very least, they need to be, validated, believed in, supported, and listened to. Because everything that they're going through is very real. What they're re-experiencing is very understandable, because when something is unresolved, the brain may crave answers, being intrigued, wanting closure because of wanting peace. If the past was problematic, if there was trauma, there can be noise and unrest. The mind and body wants peace, wants to be able to relax in the moment and long term, to enjoy life again, but also to welcome new people into their life, and if in the process of a brand new relationship, to be able to move forwards with that and make the most of it without being held back by the past. The pressures, the feelings, the needs, the wants, the desires, there's so much going on that at a time when a person may already be mentally exhausted, physically low, tired, when going to sleep, the only thing that they want is to relax. And when they can't have that, and their voices, their internal thoughts become external events, reliving it all, it's very heavy, but it's also very real. So it does need to be acknowledged. Okay? So, with that being in mind, besides waking up in odd positions, as said, low energy, not just during the day, but more importantly, because of the night terror. Through night terrors, there can be disruptance in sleep and patterns. Through cortisol levels and stress hormones being at a high, spiking with intrusive thoughts and feelings without, nightmares, can still lead to waking up early. When taking medication to sleep, but still waking up early because of the thoughts and feelings and trauma and the biological levels and the body clock, the way it's programmed and may have been programmed for so long, gets used to it in a way. But in waking up early often, or not getting enough sleep, or sleep disturbances through nightmares, it can lead to low energy. It can lead to certain health issues, or if a person already has health issues, it's been intensified or exaggerated by a lack of sleep, like with the immune system, the digestion of the body and food, the stress levels being higher, not lower, the muscles and the body being more tense and uncomfortable and achy and a bit painful, and any injuries separate, not recovering from the same way, not giving the body, the mind that recovery it needs, to revive itself, to calm the body down, the mind, so then it's ready for the next day, healthy, fit, prepared, oxygen levels and all that. Through sleep disruptance and stress and panic and fear and the night terrors, the nightmares, it kind of denies that growth, it denies that healing, that recovery time. Bedtime, going to sleep, is a very important time for the body to refuel itself for the next day. Besides food and water, it's about mentally and physically resetting and recharging to be prepared for the next day. Whether the person's busy or not, it's still important. If they are busy, work, responsibilities, activities, hobbies, whatever it is, which may use up a lot of mental or physical energy, it can be really difficult to do when the night before or often is disrupted by sleep or waking up too early and not being able to drift back off. So it can put a strain on the body and on health as well, but it's not their fault. They're dealing with a lot. I said this video today is to provide that perspective on how to cope and how to heal. But still, first of all, it's important to understand the causes, the effects, to understand the true depth behind it all, whether it's someone struggling or someone that you know of. So you know what causes it, what can affect it, which can help with the perspective later on when dealing with it. There's no point dealing with it if you don't have a backstory or you don't actually understand why it happened or where it came from. Once you've got a bit of an understanding, it can be applied and challenged with the thoughts and the consideration, right? So, with low energy, it can go in parallel with low mood. Because if you don't get enough sleep, it's like if you don't get enough food, you become a bit hungry. When you're hungry, you might become a bit moody. The body needs filling, refueling, and satisfying. It can trigger certain emotions like discomfort, frustration, lack of focus, because the body is craving something. It could be liquid, hydration. It could be food because the body is starving. Once it's refueled and it gets what it wants, then it can continue on with its day. Like a car, it needs filling up, because if it's not going to perform. It's not going to, act the way you want it to, and it will struggle to get by. A person needs food, water, and other bits and bobs here and there to refuel, to energize, to live, to survive, to function, and to perform. When certain elements are taken away, performance is impacted, and so can the mood of an individual. So when it comes to sleep, the body and mind craves that relaxation, that period to just disconnect, shut the world out, relax, refuel. So mentally, mood-based, back to a better level the next day. Like a phone needing charge, it needs to be charged in order for it to be used and run effectively and somewhat healthily. When it's not, it dies, or a low battery, it's low. A feeling similar, low. Not fully there, not energized, not as positive in some ways maybe, and the head a bit heavy. And with low mood, low energy, it can lead to fatigue, feeling extra tired. When there's not enough sleep or the quality of sleep is impacted, it can create a debt that needs to be repaid, as in like that side effects of lack of sleep, sleep deprivation, eyes heavy, the mind shutting down, not quite being able to function the same, reflexes, reaction time not as sharp, feeling fatigued, feeling a bit slow and heavy in movement, maybe sleeping here and there, closing the eyes, struggling to focus with work or activities. So it can impact daily life. That's why the whole sleeping situation is really important to get to the bottom of, to try and reach a solution so then it doesn't impact as badly daily life. And it can be a vicious cycle if left untreated. Poor sleep patterns, night terrors, nightmares, impacts the body, mind, reduces energy, lowers the mood, less likely to want to do things, less likely to get close to someone, withdrawal, isolation, but then panic and fear of things aren't changing, intrusive memories. If tired and fatigued, the mind and the brain may not be as sharp, and the self-defense mechanisms may be exhausted, that they just can't be used. The mask can't be worn to perform for the day or for people. So it's like all stripped away, and that leads to its own feelings of worry of how people will judge me, what people will think of me. If my mask is lowered because I just physically, mentally can't keep it up because of sleep, I'm going to be exposed, so I need to retreat, could trigger indirectly a freeze response. And if not, just those night terrors and nightmares can be enough to re-traumatize the individual and go through those side effects of it all again. It's a vicious cycle. It is. There's a lot going on, right? So we've mentioned low mood, low energy, how a person can go to sleep and they wake up a completely different person because of what they went through that night, what they saw, what they heard, what they felt. To an outsider, A person that may not be in the same room, let's say, if it's at arm's length, a friend, a partner, sees them one day, sees them the next day, or doesn't see them at all because of a trauma response, a deep freeze. For the outsider, it can be confusing not knowing why and how can that person change so quickly. It's nothing personal. It's what went on in that bedroom on that night, which only they likely know of to an extent. They may not be able to open up about it because they worry or fear it's too much, or they don't want to be a burden on that other half. They want to appear perfect, fine, or pretty. They don't want their darkness to become less attractive, or for their darkness or struggles, their night terror, to make the other half think less of themselves. They wouldn't want any of that. They hide it, but by hiding it, it can be an isolating feeling, and all the pressure is on them only and not shared equally. So it can be a difficult place for both parties, both partners involved in different ways. Of course, through that directly and on the sideline for themselves, the survivor who's gone through a nightmare and all those side effects and feelings, when they come out of it the next day or a few hours later, they might feel a sudden wave of shame and guilt for what they've gone through, what they've put themselves through. What they may have put someone else through, or how they feel that they put someone else through, if they've gone quiet, if they've withdrawn, if they had a freeze response, all because of a nightmare. That's the importance of it. A nightmare can be traumatizing, and it can trigger a trauma response, and the more intense it is, the more intense the response will be, as a means of protection from something that isn't physically there, but to them it is. It's not personal on the other partner, but for the other partner, it might feel personal without the context, without the closure, when one pulls away from the relationship or a friendship, and you don't see or hear from them for some time because they're in a deep freeze. A deep freeze can happen during the day, but it can also be triggered at night by just a nightmare. Just a nightmare can set it all off because it's a domino effect, lighting a fuse which sparks and ignites everything else. And the more feelings and unresolved trauma and all the stuff that they've gone through, it gets like all brought up again because of one thing. It all gets brought up. As one thing falls, everything else does follow. Dominoes. And that's what can make it so intense. That's what makes it so important and critical in knowing what can cause what. How something like that can set a deep freeze, which can last some time, if not longer, if it's more severe. So it needs to be acknowledged. The guilt and the shame can come from a deep freeze, where they've gone, how long they've been gone for, and how other people could feel from that. But before that, or beside just the night terror, and if they were with someone or living and they screamed or shouted out and the other partner was confused or worried, in some sense, the survivor may feel like they've made a show of themselves, they feel embarrassed, they humiliated themselves. Why did I do that? But they can't control it. You know, it's involuntary. It's a fight-flight mechanic. It's them dealing with a lot in the moment and being half asleep. Like sleepwalking, you might do or say things you don't actually mean, or you might regret. It's like the saying, talking in Chinese, you know, something like that. Talking in Chinese, half awake, half asleep, can't remember what you actually said or meant. It was like involuntary in a way. It was an automatic response, something that couldn't be consciously controlled in the moment. Apply that to something on a deeper level, and maybe more physically or verbally, under a night terror. Autopilot, response, self-defense mechanism, half awake, half asleep, can't tell what's real, can't tell what's not. Scared, worried, fighting for their life, surviving in the moment. That's what it can come across. And in some circumstances, the more intense or traumatic it can be, certain feelings or thoughts could go into brain fog to try and protect oneself, not wanting to relive or accept what's just happened because it's so surreal. Sometimes when it's so surreal, it gets pushed away because it's hard to believe that all that did actually happen, but it did. So other ways of looking at it. And then as I said, just a general term, the knockback effect of it all, which can trigger a low episode or much more a deep freeze. So with that being in mind, and possible injury to themselves through the nighttime sleep, injury similar in some ways to sleepwalking, which isn't as dark but still dangerous. A person who sleepwalks could fall down the stairs, break the arm, break the leg. Didn't mean to do it, but because they weren't quite there, they weren't fully awake, accidents happened, and they may wake up and think, I don't remember doing any of that, because they weren't really consciously fully there when it happened, so they're not going to remember. It can apply similar to trauma responses during sleep in some ways. Now, what we need to highlight right now, we've gone in deep, we've gone in heavy. I appreciate those that still are watching right now, listening in. I know it's really heavy. I understand it's very difficult, but it is important to acknowledge the background, the context, and some stuff that may have not been considered before, because in dealing with it, you need to know what it is in the first place, understanding what is the problem, what are the causes, the links, to be able to challenge it and face it head on or at a steady rate. If you didn't know, it's like fighting, stabbing in the dark without many results. So, first of all, it's important to highlight the don'ts, highlighting the incorrect, the improper forms of healing and the effects that it can have on an individual. Pushing on, ignoring it. Biting a knuckle, turning the other way. As in, a survivor who goes through night terrors, nightmares, frequent, often, or here and there, they just deal with it. They don't see any other way around it, or they don't think. They're just like, well, it'll ease, it'll go. It's happened before, it'll fade, doesn't matter. But not every night terror is the same as the previous one, is it? Some could be more severe than others. The next one that an individual may have could trigger a deep internal freeze, which could last months of withdrawal and isolation. Times before, a night terror could have just meant being scared and taking the day off, or going out somewhere as a distraction during the day and then cooling off and thinking, well, that's okay, I recovered. If it happens again, I'll just do the same thing. But you can't anticipate how you're going to react the next time. You can't anticipate what the actual night terror is going to be, if it's the same thing or on a deeper level. If it's some other unresolved trauma which wasn't touched upon this time, it could be next time. You can't anticipate or expect the inevitable when it's different each time, as in the struggle, the response, the actions, the dream, the terror, the vision, the unresolved issues. If there's more than one, it could manifest in a different way the next time. If the day is stressful or there's other factors going on in a person's life in that moment, it could differ to previous times when there wasn't as much stress, there wasn't as much responsibility. So dealing with one thing was easier and recovery was quicker. But now, going through a traumatic moment, a night terror, on top of everything else in life and other triggers as well in life, and unresolved trauma, there is a lot to balance. There's a lot to work with, which if the body and mind is already tired from previous sleep disruptances, even without the terrors, just unable to sleep or quality sleep, making the body and the mind tired and fatigued, trying to spin all those plates and avoid any from crashing can be an impossible task, and it can lead to a total system, mental, functional crash. So you can't expect how it's going to be next time. You can't anticipate how you recovered now is the same next time round. So pushing on and ignoring it doesn't actually help, but it's understandable why they may think or do it that way if they didn't know what to do, or they just felt that it's okay because it's happened before and it ended okay. But, before it's too late, to consider the other possibilities. Not invincible, strong, but not invincible, just about being realistic. Some people may push on because they may not have the support around them or the resources, so they've got no choice. That is understandable. But if they've got a friend, if they've got a partner, if they've got a loved one, but they hold them at arm's length, it might be best to reach out, get a bit closer to that person for the sake of them, so they get the closure, so they understand, so then they can be more supportive and know what to do. But then for the sake of one's self, easing that pain, that tension, that responsibility, that weight, no longer suffocating in silence, being able to breathe a bit lighter. It goes both ways in benefiting, right? But the effects of just pushing on, it never really gets resolved. It just gets pushed aside. And like with intrusive thoughts and unresolved trauma, when it's pushed aside for whatever reason as a response, a self-defense mechanism, or something else, timing, lack of resources, lack of time, whatever it may be, when it's pushed under the rug, it bubbles and it builds and it intensifies, and then eventually it leaks out, it explodes because it gets too much within the body or the mind. And when the body goes to sleep, the mind is still active, like a hose pipe filling up with water. If it can't come out, it's going to come out some way or another. And if it builds up, it's going to flood. And when it floods, as in intrusive thoughts, feelings, worries, and struggles, the nightmare is going to be intensified and the struggles times 1,000. So pushing it under the rug short term can help, as in getting on like nothing happened, so they don't have to face their problems or their worries because it's too scary to face it alone in their situation, circumstance, or the position that they feel that they're in, even if there are people around to support. So when it builds and when it floods, it's much more intense, and it can lead to a more intense response, like a deep freeze. If it's maintained or released over time in some way, it keeps the levels a bit lower so it doesn't bubble over and it doesn't flood or leak. So even unresolved troubles, which could be resolved very slowly with time, when dealing with the stress and when it feels like things are flaring up, just by releasing it, sharing it, reaching out to someone if possible, can help maintain the levels. It might not fix it immediately, but it just helps maintain the levels to rebuild back a level of stability, security, and working things out individually or together. So that's the causes and the effects there. Under certain circumstances, CBT just isn't effective by itself. CBT may not help a trauma survivor, a person with PTSD, especially if deep down they have complex PTSD where it can impact the nervous system, in which CBT won't work with that. Cognitive behavioral therapy is to do with challenging thoughts in regard to feelings and what's going on in the mind. It requires the brain to think. If a trauma survivor or a person in a struggling position can't think because the brain is full or it's disassociated, disconnected, the CBT isn't going to work. They may not be able to think. They may have brain fog. They may get defensive. Things can happen. It might go in one ear, it might come out the other. They might try the CBT and try and perform, but for the therapist, the researcher, not for the sake of themselves. They appreciate the support, they appreciate the information, but they just can't channel it or process it because it's hard enough processing with their struggles and their night disturbances. So in certain ways, CBT can help when challenging thoughts, but maybe immediately or first of all, it can't apply. Something more grounding is needed, less brain activity, less thoughts, and more action through simple methods. If CBT is done, yes, it may not work, but it can also lead to stress and resistance, as in they feel that it's not working, so there's no hope. It's because the form of treatment, the treatment plan was given incorrectly, and it indirectly triggers a worry response to the survivor, as in, if this doesn't work, there's no hope for me. It creates a hopelessness feeling. It can trigger complex PTSD and attack the nervous system. It's not good. So appropriate treatment needs to be given out to the survivor, because if it's done incorrectly or given out in the wrong order, it leads to more panic because the The patient, the survivor, feels like they're failing themselves, they're failing someone because it's not working. But at the end of the day, the reason why it's not working is because the treatment plan wasn't correct for them. They need a different type of recovery. They need a different process. They need a different order of recovery. It's just like with people losing weight. Going on certain diets may work for some people, but it won't for others. The others where it doesn't work, it could lead to side effects because of illnesses or, like, what do you call it? Reactions to the food and all of that. Allergies, They need a specialized diet. They need to eat certain food for it to work for them, different to others. Reaching the same end goal, losing weight, but under different circumstances and methods, and the order of it different. Everybody can act and react differently to certain variables and factors. Need to find what suits them best to get the best results and the best outcome for them. So they feel like they are succeeding rather than failing, because if they're failing, it'll trigger more panic and worry, which is something that they don't need and don't want. So there is that. And we'll get to the correct form of healing shortly. But let me just add in, when it comes to the form of advice, unsolicited advice or from non-experts, and more so mediums, spiritual coaches, spirituality, mediums, psychic mediums, as experts as they may be, whether that be in person, a reading, a crystal ball, a spirit box, a card reading, whether it be online through TikTok, a live stream, a booking, an appointment, a one-on-one consultation through a webcam, where you tell them about your life, your past, your experiences, and then they channel something to try and reach answers so you get closure. Sometimes it's a complete scam. And what some psychic mediums and spirituality hosts do is prey on the vulnerable or prey on people that are grieving, that are in a low place, a low episode, a low mood. Basically, target someone who isn't mentally right or at a low point in life, because if you act as their savior, you can convince them anything, tell them anything, and they'll be convinced by it. If you present yourself as if you're here to help them, to save them from their pain, their worry, and you convince them good enough, they will believe in it and fall for it. It's got nothing to do with blaming the survivor or critiquing them. It can't be helped. They're struggling. They want help. They probably need help, or they just want some closure. And if someone is good at being manipulative, taking advantage, opportunistic, if they present themselves in a professional way and everything, they persuade that survivor to listen, to take things on board, but also possibly through payment. Not everyone does it for free. If there is a business or a thing on the sideline through TikTok, through YouTube, influencers, even celebrities, even professionals, they can make money from it, but it's done in a manipulative way. Feeding possible BS or feeding information that they want to hear and listen to get that money out of them. But what does that do to that survivor? A false sense of lies, where it doesn't get better, where things don't heal or change, and then they might realise that eventually that crash, that fall, that shock, that stab in the back, that stab in the heart, what good does that do exactly? And furthermore, like how we said earlier, in the forms of a medium or some kind of spiritual person, by relating the past to the present and saying it's a message from a loved one, it's a previous ex-partner trying to reach out and communicate. You need to let them in, you need to hear them out, you need to talk to them. Whoa, that is extremely dangerous. Some cases it could be considered professional, but it's extremely dangerous, because when you talk about the biology of it and the psychology, the spiritual people, the mediums, they don't consider that to the same extent. They go on a different element, a different density, a different wavelength. Whether it's truly real or not, they make use of it and channel it in such a way You've seen it with readers, card readers, where they somehow learn about the past of that person and then use it, and then the other individual's shocked and saying, how did you know this? And how did you know that? How did you know that person's name? Because I probably did a background check on that person beforehand. Looked online, looked at records, files, whatever, documents, papers, sensitive information, got another friend, a friend of a friend to communicate with to get that knowledge. Faking it in a way. Bit of a fraud. Not everyone's like that, but these different circumstances, it can be manipulative, it can be dark. A person can come across as if they're here to save you and help you, but really they're doing it for their own gain and benefit in some way. And even if they're not benefiting truly, their practices may actually leave the survivor more open and prone to further punishment inflicted on them and suffering and pain and all of that. That's not good whatsoever. Okay? And sometimes it can lead to the cliffhanger effect. It's okay, a medium channeling their thoughts when the survivor has reached out to them directly, okay? Because it's not just one way. One person's got to reach out to the other for help. But it's important for the one doing the help to consider why that survivor wants help, and is it professional? Is it appropriate? Does it align with what's needed here? Got to take it into consideration. When the survivor reaches out to someone or something for help, they are trying to get better. Credit to the survivor for trying to get better, trying to help themselves, but they at times can only do so much. They do need help and support from experts, and if the experts don't do it properly or things go wrong, it can lead to betrayal, trust issues, and not trusting in the process or the healing because it didn't work once or twice. Why would it work now? It's got to be done very carefully and appropriately. And when it comes to psychic mediums and spirituality people at times, the whole mention of the past, the afterlife and ghost and hauntings and all of that, yeah, it's okay highlighting it and saying it does exist. It's a past partner. And what? Oh, they've got something to say. And you need to deal with it. And what next? It's left on a cliffhanger in which they're told that they've got to deal with it themselves whilst they've been dealing with it all this time. They've got a few more answers, which may bring a bit of closure. Short term, it brings them a bit of closure and happiness to know that things are acknowledged and what they're feeling and sensing is real. But all it does, it leaves the person on a cliffhanger, not knowing what to do next. It's not good. The side effects can be damaging. It can lead to maladaptive behavior, adapting to what they were already doing in a slightly unhealthy way and not changing the cycle or the process because they believe this is the only way and this is what helps eventually. Almost being convinced by experts to stick to this method because it's the right thing to do, or at least some words are said, what the survivor wants to hear, and they make sense of it themselves, or they fill in the gaps with their own beliefs when they might not be in the right frame of mind, and then it just double downs in keeping that behavior up. But that type of maladaptive behavior doesn't lead to true healing or recovery. Physically, mentally, psychologically, biologically, it doesn't lead to true healing. It's a bandage over a deep wound which needs stitches and intense, closer attention, gently. And that is why right now I'm going to highlight the core elements of attempting to heal and recover, whether that be post-event of the trauma, the nightmare, or if it be in the process or just before it happens, depending on when the survivor feels able to consider. It can involve a partner, a support network as well when applied. At first, I'm just going to apply it to if an individual was by themselves, alone, or in a separate room, dealing with a nightmare, okay? So whether they feel it coming on, or more so, it just takes over in their sleep and they wake up, whether that be 3 in the morning, 3:30, panicking, worrying, fighting it off, involuntary movement. When they do eventually settle down and they're trying to make sense of it all, the best thing to do is to breathe. And now, It's not that typical advice, it's breathing as in the importance of it. Not to get too deep, but the last video that I did about the bottom-up approach, which is the opposite of CBT. The bottom-up approach is starting from the core basics of the body functions, the motor movements, calming the body, bringing a sense of familiarity and slowly working up to the top, which is the brain and the thoughts and the feelings, which can be CBT. CBT can be applied to PTSD survivors, but maybe not to begin with, but at a later stage, okay? The same with night terrors and trauma and sleep disturbances. At a time when asleep and being woken up and going through it all, exhausting, tiring. The one thing they don't want to be doing is having to think any more than what they already have done. So keeping it simple and basic goes a long way. And as I said, a previous video that I did in regard to the importance of breathing and the bottom-up approach is in my severe deep freeze video. For the context of that and the link, it's available top right corner where the eye symbol is up there, okay? So, when the person during nighttime is struggling, and depending on the severity of the night terror, the panic and the worry and all of that, if they finally get to a place where they can, cool down a little bit, or they're a bit more awake, still scared, anxious, as in what just happened, what's going on, in that moment, it's important to breathe as best as you can. A deep breath in. Hold for a second or two to build that resilience as best as can be, and then release out through the mouth to create that constant loop and cycle, which can bring a familiarity, a sense of connection, and a bit more peace. Better oxygen levels can lower the stress in the body, and an endless flow of breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth creates a loop which can bring a level of control, self-control in regards to if the person's dealing with OCD. Stabilizing, restabilizing from the bottom, rebuilding in the moment. Performing an action which has been performed since birth. Breathing. Even if the breathing is a bit up and down, just in through the nose, hold for a few seconds, out through the mouth, and then hold. Once the oxygen, once within, has exited the lungs, emptied, holding for a second or two to build that resilience, that reward system, to then breathe back in healthy oxygen, and then breathe back out. So, like this, breathe in, hold, and then out, hold, then back in, breathe, hold, then back out, hold, and then breathe back in. Repeating that to calm the body and the mind, to lower the blood pressure, to lower the heart rate, slowly breathing, regaining a slight level of self-control back. Healthy oxygen levels increased slightly. In the process of that, when slightly calmer, what could be considered before or after the night terror is having the window open just a little bit. It can even be done before going to bed, having the window open just a little bit so you hear additional sounds, calming sounds from outside, providing there's no triggers, of course. If the person's aware, triggers like loud bangs and sounds, maybe keep the window closed. But if there's no triggers, keep the window open just a little bit for that fresh air, which can help, with any breathing problems, any issues there. It gets rid of the denseness of the atmosphere, because the atmosphere in the room feels very heavy, full of terror, fear, worry, and memories from the past. By opening that window, it creates like a visual metaphor for, letting in fresh air and letting out all the badness and all the bad energy, letting it escape through the window, as a way of regulating the body. Visualizing an object as a means of escapism without the person having to do the running, but the darkness does itself in the moment. Before or after the night terror, when possible. Fresh air coming in, the sound of the trees blowing in the wind, or just a gentle breeze sound, or the sound of light traffic in the background, the sound of water splashing, the sound of boats bobbing up and down, or horns in the docks or the ocean, wherever you might be living, right? A sense of familiarity, as in where you are, a grounding feeling, as in hearing sounds can help pull the person out of a deep freeze, pull a person out in the moment with a night terror, a nightmare. When you hear a familiar sound or feel or smell something, it can be the counter to it. If triggers can come from senses, then there's a possibility that senses can pull someone out of re-traumatization. If there is a memory which can, if there is like a factor, a variable, a sensory action, a sound, a smell that can be a trigger to re-traumatization, there could possibly be a factor, a variable which triggers a positive memory, a sense of familiarity and safety, security, happiness, which pulls the person out of the darkness. So before it's even happened, when going to bed, as a precaution, having the window open just a little bit can help with fresh air, regulating the body, the nervous system, better oxygen levels too, especially if near nature as well and trees. The sound as well can be calming on the body and the mind, and a distraction. That if a night terror does creep in, with the window being partially open, that better breathing when doing the breathing technique to try and calm down works hand in hand, and the sounds outside can play in as a form of grounding the individual, reminding them where they really are, not where they think they are. You know? Pulling them out of that dream world, that nightmare, bringing them back down to reality for the right reasons, and done gently. That can play a role a bit later on, which we'll get to. But beside breathing and controlling that to calm the body, regulate the nervous system, it's about the touch, touching things about within reason and when possible. You know, feeling and grabbing and squeezing like the sheets, a pillow, something soft, which brings a level of familiarity, as in, oh, this is my object, this is my pillow, my bed, my sheets, my place and my space. This is all me. This is what I own. Not them, but me. It creates that dynamic without even thinking to begin with. But that build up, as in reclaiming power, reclaiming one's senses and one's environment. This is your house. This is your home. This is your safe place. The past is the past, but unfortunately it's carried over and it's consumed the air, the environment. The internal inner thoughts of that survivor struggling has transmitted into a vision from the past to try and clear all of that, or to ease it, to remind themselves through senses, through touches, that they are safe, they are in a different place to where they were from the past. If they've been traumatized in the past, different location, different town, city, country, different house, you know? They've moved away, they've moved on, they've escaped, possibly, under those circumstances. But when having a night terror, the past has carried over, like a haunting. If they feel things around them, if they hear things around them, it's grounding. It distracts them. It reminds them of where they really are, living in a different house, living in a different room, living in a different location, having different possessions to what they did back then, having new things now compared to what they didn't have back then. Reminding them of their place, their position, their role, who they are, what they have, their possessions, them. They're in control of it, they bought it, they own it, they make use of it. The past, that previous partner, not around to take over, not around to pull it away, not around to cut it up, not around to control anymore. This is for them, as in the survivor. This is their place, their sanctuary, their peace, on their terms. It's that grounding reminder, reminding them of who they are, whilst what they've gone through, who they are now, but they have survived, but they have a new place, they have a new purpose maybe, they've got new things. They're not going to think all that in the moment, but it's just an inner monologue of feelings translated into words based on what they can touch around them. You know, the feeling of losing control or feeling like going insane by grabbing hold of a curtain, grabbing hold of the bed sheets, grabbing hold of the bed, grabbing a hold of the, I can't show you on there, the headboard, you know, back there, just grabbing something that's physical, that's real, can, you know, differentiate from reality to what's kind of made up but visualized outwards. You know what I'm saying? If they have a vision, a thought, a feeling, and it's come out and expressed in other ways, it's not actually there, but it's an extension of what's going on in here. They need to be able to grab a hold of something that they do own, that is physically present and does exist, both in their mind and both in reality. Grounding themselves, pulling themselves out of that trance, out of that nightmare, that dream. Because just like positive dreams, when a person wakes up from a dream, which could be really nice, they come back to reality. In those circumstances, when waking up back to reality, it's like disappointing, isn't it? Wishing whatever was in that dream was real right now. For a person that's dealing with a nightmare, night terror, especially when half awake and waking up and still feeling it, reliving it because of the powerfulness of it, it's the one time where they wish they could wake up and not wake up feeling it, but actually wake up to reality if it was basic and boring, like a person waking up from a dream. But it's not quite like that, is it? That's why external action is needed without thinking too much, just senses. If senses can trigger, senses can also help pull a person out. Remind them of where they actually are and what's real compared to what's not. Sometimes when a person's distracted on the real things in life, the mind in some areas shuts off from the worry or the panic. Then when they reflect back on what they were supposed to be doing or thinking, it's like, oh, never mind. Because it wasn't physically there to begin with, but for them, at the time, it was real. That's the balancing act. It's not about saying it's not real, because that would be dismissing them. It would be putting them down. That does no good. It's just got to be patient, right? So, do I have anything around me? Just by feeling an object like this, imagine if this was like a pillow, squeezing it, you know? By squeezing it, it reminds the individual that it's real, it does exist, it distracts them from what they are thinking or worrying about, transfers their brain, their thoughts, their patterns onto something more healthy and more safe. By feeling it, especially if it's something really soft and squishy, they can relate to that as like a symbolism of safety and peace. When something is fluffy, soft, it means no harm, right? When they're in the face of darkness or someone from the past that has caused such pain and hurt, the contrast to that is feeling something, even if it's an inanimate object, as soft, squishy, smooth, warm, and even scented, with their scent or perfumes. It reminds them it belongs to them. It reminds them it's something real, something physical and mental. It pulls them out partially from external things going on which aren't actually there within reason. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't just have to be this. It could be bed sheets. It could even be the carpet. Feeling the ground as a metaphor for literally being grounded with reality, knowing their place, where they're at, waking them up themselves from that trance that they're in. So feeling something soft, soothing and calm can relax the body, relax the hands, especially if the body's already tense. It needs a release. So in other ways, it's not just about touching or feeling something and describing it to be grounded. It's about the push, pull, squeeze dynamic. If the individual can push and pull in avoidant attachment behavior with a partner because of survivor's guilt, for example, in an alternative, more healthy way, they can apply it as in an object. Previously, In the deep freeze video, I mentioned about a grounding method incorporating sensory objects and channeling it through thoughts and feelings. That if you had a bottle and you transferred all those thoughts into that bottle as the ex-partner, a previous person, and you look at it, does it pose much threat? No. Is it present? Not really. What does it feel like? What does it look? It's not much. It's like processing without the danger, the intimate threat. You know? Well, the same can be done with pushing and pulling when the person is conscious and awake. Providing they've done the breathing first, calmed themselves, they're not disorientated, they're somewhat okay, maybe a bit of liquid as well to hydrate, okay? Or maybe if they're already up and about and they can't quite calm themselves, if the breathing's not working, to maybe squeeze an object which is safe to squeeze, like a pillow, a squishy toy, a plush toy, you know? By squeezing something, it's releasing all that tension built up in the body, you know? Especially during a nightmare, the body, the muscles are very tense. By squeezing something, holding it, and then releasing, it's calming the body and the muscles, the contractions, you know, like squeeze, hold on as much as possible, then release. Like how when a person is going through pregnancy, birth, they might grab hold of a partner's hand or grab hold of something to, you know, as a distraction, to concentrate, to regulate, to disperse that pain, that discomfort, to release that built up energy within, to release that energy, to release that adrenaline, you know? Tensing the body and then releasing to allow either lactic acid or other blood flow in the body to flow and rush to areas to function, to release, to relieve in a way, you know, by squeezing and then releasing. In other ways, as a metaphor for trying to push away that night terror, that vision, that darkness, is by leaning up against a wall or facing the wall, back against the wall, head against the wall, using the back or the hands to push against it, to release that energy, you know, the overflow of it, to regulate the body. You know, in a safe environment as well, without punching, just gently pushing against the wall. Stretching the body as well, stretching the arms, stretching the back can help relieve tension. You know, during the night terror or waking up in an uncomfortable position, yoga, gentle stretches before getting on with the day to release any built up energy, to relieve any tension, to stretch the body and the mind metaphorically. Releasing dopamine, calming the body, feeling a little bit more satisfied, and a few little positive feelings here and there to counter the negatives. So the push, pull, squeeze dynamic can work with a wall, a pillow, a mattress, blanket, a stress ball. If you used to have one of those, take a stress ball to bed. So if things got tense or hard or difficult, grab that stress ball and keep squeezing it, because it's repetitive action. That repetitive action can calm the body and mind and relax it a little bit by exercising the body, exercising the mind, a sensory form of regulating the body, and a grounding technique to reality from what's not real. Keeps the mind focused and active, but in the right way. And if a person's got OCD, ruminating thoughts and loops, compulsions and repetitive behavior, by doing that repetitive squeezing, it's calming the OCD, which will calm the intrusive thoughts. It's regulating the body, maintaining that control by squeezing it constantly. Those repetitive actions when using a stress ball, a pillow, a neck rester is safe to do, because what you're squeezing won't harm you. You know, soft items. It's not going to cause any long-term damage, but it certainly will ease slightly the OCD and, you know, overthinking or any compulsions that can come with it in other ways. You know, it's regulating it for the right ways. So yeah, there's that. Now, the other thing that can be done at some point is gentle tapping on the legs, on the knees, on the side, on a table, on the windowsill if the person's already up, on the wall, gentle taps, sensory inputs about, gentle little taps, you know? If it's done in rhythm with a certain beat and rhythm, it can be quite calming for the mind, doing it at a certain pace under their own terms. By them doing it under their own terms and regulating it at a nice steady pace or whatever pace they feel like, they're in control. If they can have sensory inputs and outputs which they're in control of, it brings them back to reality and makes them feel a little bit calmer, because during a nightmare, they're not in control. When dealing with intrusive thoughts and feelings and hallucinations, they're not quite in control, are they? So gentle little taps with your own hands, fingers, calming and a little bit more relaxing, a little bit of a distraction, calming the mind, easing any tension. On an object, on their chest, on their heart, on their face, anywhere which can ground them back to reality, reminding them of what's real and what does exist, right? So that is where we can start moving on to some other things. Wiggling as well can help. By wiggling the hands, wiggling the legs, wiggling the ankles, wiggling the feet, it just increases blood flow around the body, especially during sleep paralysis or the freeze response in the moment. The mind's active, the eyes are open, but the body can't move. The body may tense up, cramp, strains, aches, uncomfortable positions. It can be uncomfortable. So by shaking it up, it's like shaking all those thoughts, but not literally, shaking the body gently, little gentle movements, rhythmic, the wrist, the hands, the fingers, maybe the neck, like that. Clunking and clicking, just stretching the body and wiggling the ankles, wiggling the joints and the fingers and the toes, because that's what can lead to better blood flow in those areas. Feeling just a little bit better and a little bit more alive in the moment when dealing with that suspended feeling and paralysis, breaking out from it gently, right? Other aspects, what can be done if it's more intense and the individual can't snap out of it, whether they do it themselves or it's applied gently by a partner in a controlled condition, is by getting some cold water or slightly cold water, splashing it in their face, splashing it on the wrist where the veins are. That cold water can shock the body and wake the mind up. If it's that intense and the person can't pull themselves out, cold water can help, waking them up, snapping them out of whatever, right? If what else can be done as well on the sideline is if they have sour sweets or something sour, a sour drink that's safe to consume, a sour food, a sour sweets like Haribo's with all the sugary stuff on. I can't remember what it's called, but it makes it very sour, or toxic waste or warheads, depending on what sweets that an individual has, or maybe something like a lemon, just something that can, be a sensory input in an intense way where it can make the person like reflex, like sweet but more sour, where it wakes the person up. Even when a person is awake and functioning, if they was to consume something sour, it can make the head shake, it can send tingles through the body, it can make the face scrunch up in a way, the eyes close slightly. It can wake the person up, it can shock them, but not dangerously, no, but done safe. If a person's going through night terrors and they consume something like that, it can wake them up just a little bit, it can help, right? Other things that can be done during or after, or even before, is a weighted blanket. A feeling of being weighted down by a blanket, by a person within reason, brings a level of safety, security, and stability. It's not about feeling trapped, it's about feeling secure. It's about feeling warmth physically and mentally. When there is something heavy on top or slightly weighted when compressing against the skin, it can trigger a nice feeling. Okay? Whether that be a quilt, a heavy pillow, an object, an item, a person, it can be applied. It can bring about a level of safety. So if they're panicking or worrying, by grabbing, squeezing, or pulling something close to them, which is safe, and holding on to it, calming the body just a little bit, or the partner could fetch them a pillow or something soft to contain themselves with. The other thing that can be done with a partner or without is spooning. The sleeping position where they're on their side and they grab a hold of something. Now, if they're doing it by themselves, either they back up into a pillow, they bunch up a blanket and lean against it, or they grab a pillow and kind of go into the fetal position on their side, their legs wrapped, their knees wrapped around a pillow, their arms too, holding it close under their neck against their chest, squeezing and holding it, feeling the weight, feeling the squishiness, or depending on what object they're holding on to or person, to feel safe and secure, to try and escape from the darkness. It's just different coping mechanisms, and it can be done beforehand to try and prevent certain feelings or unwarranted feelings and thoughts, right? The other method that can be done is the 1, 2, 3, 4 approach, where you name so many things around you, or name so many things that you can feel and touch in your presence. That requires a bit more thought, consideration, and talking, so that can be at a later stage. Once going through the breathing, the semantic, touch-based approach, calming the body just through motor actions, gentle and slow, upgrading to the higher actions of general basic thoughts and general basic questions. What can you smell? Can you hear anything? If the window's open, you might be able to hear sounds outside. It's distracting the body, asking, answering questions to get away from the darkness, okay? It's not like avoidance or running from it. It's about challenging it in a more healthy way. So then at the later stages, it can be challenged head on in different circumstances. But in the moment of trying to cope and heal, smaller steps are needed for it to be effective. So name things you can see, name things you can touch and hear and possibly taste, just to regulate the body, grounding and reality. And then to repeat that daily or often to get used to it, so then it can become more effective and more common and known. When something is more common and known and it brings about a level of peace, it can really help at a time of uncertainty, like with a night terror, a nightmare. It's worth taking into consideration. As for a partner, what should a partner do? Be there to listen, be there to give some space, not to jump in with a hug, only when they want it and when they ask, if there is a prompt. If you were to grab them, hold them when they're going through their nightmare, they may accidentally get triggered and think you are them, who they're talking to, and take it out on you. It can lead to a backlash verbally or physically, which they hate what they've done later, and it drives them deep into shame and guilt. And for you yourself, to have a partner, you might experience the heavy weight of it or on the receiving end. So when a person's struggling, give them space, give them time until they're ready to talk or willing to reach out or want a hug. Don't jump in. You jump in when they're still dealing with in the moment. It can backfire badly all around. Got to be careful. As well, even though said CBT is ineffective for people, it can become effective at a later stage or on a smaller scale. And in regard to the methods of night terrors and how it links to the past, what could be done is to write down thoughts and feelings before going to bed on paper. And then when going to sleep, if waking up during the night terror or not, to consider writing down thoughts and feelings on a separate piece of paper. And then the next time when they wake up in the morning, writing down thoughts and feelings on another piece of paper. And then going over the notes, before, middle, and end. Is it consistent or not? Is it all over the place? It's just the beginning of processing unresolved thoughts and feelings, things that are roaming around in the head that just haven't been resolved. What's not being resolved or dealt with are roaming around loosely and not locked down because they've not been resolved. So by channeling it at times of when awake and present, writing down whatever comes to mind, no pressure, low pressure, avoiding brain fog, without it being too much on the spot, doing it naturally, writing it all down as much as possible, it can help. And the reason why is just like when a person has a good idea, if they go to sleep on that good idea, it could ruminate, but they could also forget it, or it could disrupt their sleep because they're thinking about it too much. If there's an action or a behavior that needs to be performed before going to bed, it can help ease the mind after. So if you had a good idea, you had a video idea, you had a project, to-do list, write it down before you go to bed, so then you don't have to worry about forgetting it because it's all in one place. You don't need to worry. Safety, security first, right? Easing the mind as well. By writing it down on paper, you're alleviating some of that stress and strain on the mind and putting it on paper and reminding yourself you don't have to have the responsibility of remembering it all, because you're not going to forget. It's written down, it's noted, it will be okay. Whatever those thoughts and feelings are, positive or negative, and then the next time when they wake up or during their sleep, they can look at that paper, they can consider separate thoughts to what was said earlier, different sheet of paper. It's important to use a different sheet of paper for each interval. So the previous and the one after isn't influenced in any way. Removing the biasness, removing the previous thoughts. How a person feels one moment can differ later. This is a symbolism and a microcosm, just like with the night terrors. How one person can appear happy and cheerful during the day, the next morning disassociated, withdrawal, deep freeze response because of what happened at night. A night and day difference may not always be comparable on the surface level. The same way with writing down thoughts and feelings on paper. Separate pieces of paper, even organizing it before sleep, just so it's structured. Writing down what comes to their mind, their head, memories, things to do, any worries, any feelings, any thoughts, anything really. And then repeating that separate piece of paper if they did wake up during the night. If they woke up during the night and had a night terror, if they could write down how they feel, what's going through their mind on paper. If they can't in the moment, but they go through the semantic process, the bottom-up approach, breathing slowly, gently, working their way up. When calm, considering writing it down on paper, separate. And then next morning when woken up, writing whatever down on another piece. And then, whether it be the same day or the day after, end of the week, reviewing the sheets of paper, reviewing the notes, comparing and contrasting, trying to figure out if there is a pattern or a link associated with how they felt before, how they felt during, and how they felt after. Working it out bit by bit. I'm not going to have all the answers because we don't know what they would write on paper, but it's just the beginning of processing unresolved trauma and thoughts, picking out what's unresolved, what isn't, working out what needs to be looked at and what doesn't, and then maybe applying it in other ways, whether that be with professionals, whether that be with family, support systems, partner, because the partner might be able to help as well, but they can't help if they don't know. So to be able to break the ice, to be able to break the cycle, to be able to close that arm's length by coping in its own right. Let's just highlight this. Besides the CBT, just the coping and the breathing and the healing is a very slow but passive recovery and a level of resilience building up against the darkness. If there wasn't a manual or a coping mechanism before when dealing with the night terrors and the hell and just getting through it, well, dealing with these coping mechanisms and little healing moments to pull oneself out of the darkness can be a form of resilience and a way of building up, a level of strength to counter the darkness and mastering it slowly with time to try and reduce how long those night terrors last for in the moment and reduce the intensity of it by those grounding effects. Learning very slowly and understanding what's real and what's not, what's inside and what's not on the outside, Just the coping mechanisms indirectly is a slow form of passive recovery and healing, combating and challenging the unresolved trauma, the possible survivor's guilt, the feeling of self, denial of happiness. Slowly going at it at a steady pace, so it's not too invasive, not too obvious, but the mind adapts slowly. With those methods, through consistency, of course, that's what really helps, the consistency. But, you know, the CBT with the notes and the paper, writing it down, comparing the notes, trying to establish a link when feeling strong enough to do so, you know? Uncovering the truth, uncovering the past, and maybe sharing it with someone close so you don't have to deal with it alone. Having it written down so it's memorized but not internalized, so it's not always on loop in here, but it's on paper. So if you ever needed to go back to it, you can look at it. You don't have to carry the weight. By being able to express it, relieves the tension within. By being able to put it on paper, relieves the responsibility and pressure of having to remember it, because some people, trauma related, hold on to memories as a means of working things out to get answers for closure, even if they don't get them, like with survivor's guilt. They may feel if they do forget, bad things happen, or if they do forget the past, people from back then, previous partner, may suffer or struggle, and then it makes them, the survivor, the partner, feel really bad about it and themselves. So paper and notes, expressing, relieving, easing tension, easing responsibility and pressure, and sharing it in some way with another person, even if it's through non-verbal communication. If you want to reach out to someone but you can't get the words out, if you're at least able to write it on the paper at the time, maybe share that paper with the partner so then they can read it and slowly learn too. So it's a shared experience within reason. It's a slow process, but it's movement forwards, and that's what matters most. If nothing was done before, when something is done now, it can only be, positive in a way. Steady movement on one's own terms at a natural rate. That's what can be considered. That's what can be applied. Hopefully this video helps in some way, and yeah, I hope it helps in a way, and that the video is able to reach out to a variety of people in general, and appreciate those that have watched this video, maybe during the live stream or on catch up. As I said, this video will always be public, so you can always go back to it and listen in. And on top of that, the full playlist, including this video, will be located where the psychology one is up there, top right corner screen, where the I symbol is. With that all being said, my name's Wyatt Raff. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye, take care for now, and good night.